Yes, so thank you for inviting me here to your congregation here today. My name is Max. I am, of course, David's youngest son. And he has asked me to give you a testimony. Now, testimonies are very popular in the church, I've come to learn. There is a YouTube channel I actually watch from a ministry called One for Israel, which is all about people who were raised in a Jewish faith who tell their stories of how they came to see Jesus as their Messiah. They call themselves Messianic Jews rather than Christians, and there's over 200 stories of testimony that they give, and I strongly suggest you all see it. It's some wonderful stories, and I think stories are the great thing about testimonies. Stories are the thing that I love most, and stories are amazing things that can capture everyone. Whether you like sports or you like politics or history, everyone likes a good story about the thing they like. So my dad told me to give a testimony, but not just a testimony. He wanted me to weave this in with the biblical story, to give more than just my story, but how it connects to the Bible story. And I, of course, love this idea because I think the Bible is a story, first and foremost. The Bible is narrative more than anything. And while I think we all know this, we all know that there are stories in the Bible, I don't think many people are really aware of the power of this, the power of story. And I don't think we know how to connect the Bible to our own lives. I don't think people know what it is that the Bible can speak to today. People say, this is a story from 2,000 years ago or more. What does this matter to me? A lot of my friends say that, at least. Most people are not interested in history or the things that push into their own lives. They don't know the context of things. But for me, the Bible is the story that brought me back into the faith. As it's been said, my story is a story of adult conversion. Though I have a minister for a father, I never really felt like I was raised in the faith or raised in the church. I think my parents were, in one sense, very good in giving us the opportunity to see the world as it is, to make our own decisions and not be sectarian. And my story is one of many phases, and one that I think connects to the biblical story. And one of the things to say on this is stories operate by certain rules and certain concepts and traditions. Now, I went to Flinders University, where I got my Bachelor of Arts in English Studies, English Literature and Film, and that's basically a tertiary degree in storytelling. It's about how stories work. And the Bible is a story that has its own understandings and meanings. And I believe there is a slide, if whoever's controlling the slides might give us the next one. Yes, so the map. Maps of meaning, not to quote someone, but the Bible has a setting. The Bible has this map of all the story takes place in this area of the real land of the Middle East and of the Verdant Crescent, the Levant. And as the Jewish people came to dwell in the land, they came to write poetry and write hymns and psalms, and they came to indwell the real places around them with a sense of meaning in their own story. So I just thought I'd give this as something of an example of how the Bible might connect to your own life and how it connects to me, as I talk about the meanings of the locations of the metaphysical geography that you might find in the Bible. And in the Bible, there are 5 main kind of locales that have deep meaning. So the first, of course, is the central place, which is Israel, the land that was promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That is the promised land, like the Garden of Eden before. That is the good place. That is the place that God has given, the verdant land, the land flowing with milk and honey. And around them are the 4 directions, north, south, east, and west. And each of those have their own meaning. So to the right and to the left, which of course is the title of this sermon, is either the Arabian Peninsula, which is the desert, or the wilderness, which is where they came up through from the land of Egypt. And the wilderness is that time of trial, those 40 years in the desert, wandering in a place of little water, in a place of desolation, and a place of meaninglessness, when they have no land, where God and his people do not have a place to call their own. And then, of course, to the other side is the Mediterranean Sea, which is the opposite problem, too much water from too little water. And water, of course, has a lot of meaning in the Bible. It is the swirling chaos. It is the place where Leviathan dwells. The writhing of the seas is like the writhing of the nations. And it is a place where there is no solid land to hold to. And then, apart from these two lands of existential dread, there are two great forces to the north and to the south. So Egypt to the south, the land of slavery, the land of tyranny, the land that God brought them out of. And then to the north, Babylon, which is the oppressing empire, the empire of wicked idols and evil kings. It is the place where they are condemned to go when they sin, when they do not hold to the law. This is all basic stuff that most of us, if we've been raised in the faith, understand, or even if you don't know it, you know that these are the meanings that are woven into the story as the Bible progresses. And this very much connects to my life, and I thought I'd talk about how my life feels very much like this, feels like a place of the good place and the bad places all around. In fact, if someone says, what is a testimony? I would say a testimony is how you went from the wilderness of meaninglessness or else the tyrannies of false idols into the promised land. That is, every testimony speaks of how they got back to the garden. And my story begins in the same way the Bible begins. It begins in a garden. A garden of innocence is how I describe the first phase of my life and the setting of my life. I began in a good home with good parents and a good childhood. Of course, my father, being the minister, is someone who's held to a high moral bar, and he is a very good man. I feel, in some sense, it's unfair. It's unfortunate for my father that his comparison is his wife, who is much better than him as a person. My dad always has to overcome his selfish nature and hold to his principles, and it's a constant effort every day, whereas my mum just effortlessly is a good person. She is so nice, so giving, and I feel sorry for my father that he's compared to that, although I feel sorry for my mother that she's married to him. But they are a good couple, and I apologize to my father for this, but I know that sons of ministers are often the illustrations in their ministry, so why not put him in mine? But my father, I would say, as opposed to all the friends I had in primary school and in high school, my father is a principled man, and my parents held together where so many of my friends' marriages, my friends' parents ended in divorce. The way I describe the good innocence that I had in my childhood is that when I went to school, I said, are you guys excited for Christmas? And all my friends would say, no, we hate Christmas. And I said, how could that be? Christmas is when you get to spend time with your family. And they'd say, that's why we don't like Christmas. All of my friends in high school had a difficult childhood, and it came with baggage, and it came with emotional scars and psychological issues, whereas I seemed to be exempt from that, and my siblings seemed to be exempt from that. We all agree that we had a very privileged upbringing in that we had parents who held together where so many fell apart, and we had parents who had answers to difficult questions. They had a sense of, love by devotion and will. My family is not the most sentimental family, but they are a loving family. And that's what I learned is love is not a sentiment, it's not a feeling, it's an act of the will. This gave me a wonderful sense of a foundation of security and safety. But all of this is, I guess, when it comes to more the conversation of God and of religion, I didn't really notice these things. When you're a kid, you don't know what it takes to put food on the table, to pay the bills. You also don't know what it takes to get into the promised land. If you don't know the promise, how hard it is to keep a promise, you don't know the importance of the promise. So religion to me was something in the background that my father talked a lot about and definitely informed their life, but I didn't really notice it. For me, it was all about just dreaming my dreams. When I was a kid, I loved stories. I loved watching movies. I loved reading novels. I liked Disney. I liked Ghibli. I liked Star Wars, Star Trek, Lord of the Rings, sci-fi fantasy. I was a kid lost in his dreams and his imaginings. And if there is something like a God, then I always thought it was like a neighbor on the other side of the fence. You know you have neighbors. I don't know my neighbors. And every now and again you hear them in their garden and you feel a sense of intrusion, a sense of invasion, and I would slink away. And if there was a God, then he was at the periphery of my life, and I didn't really think about it. I wasn't very conscious of most things when I was a kid. I was too busy dreaming my dreams. But as was mentioned here with the kids, the prodigal son story, I feel like I can identify somewhat to that. I was a prodigal son in that I had a wonderful inheritance and I went out into the world and I tried to live my own life. There's also a great story called The Hymn of the Pearl, which is about a prince from Israel who goes to Egypt to seek a pearl. And by the river, he is given a cup. And he drinks from the cup and he forgets about the pearl, he forgets about the king, he forgets about his noble goal. That's how it was for me. When I went out into the world, I left the garden of innocence and I went into either the wilderness, the chaos, or the land of idolatry. A great way to sum up what I would say is either the existential dread or the idolatrous powers. I would say university wonderfully sums that up in my life. University is a place of either depressed nihilists who are all gathering in the bar saying nothing's anything, there is no meaning, we're all just going to die. Or I would talk to people who go, no, you have to believe in something and this is what it is. And I say, I'm right, follow me. That is university. That is this map. University is very much conforms to that. But I did find that everyone believes in something. Everyone has their own ideas that they follow. And there's a great book by N.T. Wright. It's called Broken Signposts. And he says that in the world, we all find these signposts that indicate to us some greater meaning, that to us, if we find them important enough and if we pursue them enough, they become almost sacred to our own lives. And I found this in other people. I found, for instance, I have one friend who's obsessed with freedom. They say, I want freedom and I'll get it through power. If I get power, then I'll be able to leave my home of a very legalistic home and I'll have autonomy. So power gets them freedom. And then I have another friend who also likes power, but their pursuit of power is for justice. They say the world is unjust. All the people who have power abuse their power. So if I get power in my two hands, then I can fix the world and I can do that, and justice will flow from my power. And then I have someone else I know who believes in justice because they say the world is full of suffering and pain and it's unfair. But they think if they just love and give themselves to other people and give themselves, if we all just loved each other, then the world would be a just place. The world would be healed and fixed. So all these concepts and virtues are at the center of people's lives. And I would encourage you to read this book and to think about what it is that you hold at the center of your life. Because for me, I found that I had two virtues, two ideas that I held the most important. And I found two communities that embody these two ideas. And that is, I loved beauty and I loved truth. And I found those two concepts in the arts and in the academy, the university. I found two places that held these as sacred. Beauty, I loved, first and foremost. As I said, I love stories. Stories are beautiful. Stories tell of those beautiful truths. And I found that in the arts community. In the arts community, you meet the artists, you meet the poet, you meet the painter, you meet the storyteller, you meet the cinematographer, and they're all devoted to their craft. They're all devoted to beauty. They are seeking something beyond the confines of the material world. I also met many people who were spiritual but not religious, is the term, and they spoke also, yes, there has to be more than just the material conditions. There has to be more than just this. The artist and the spiritualist are both reaching out and exploring those abstract concepts for something that can rejuvenate the human soul, the human condition. And I really loved these communities because they were really devoted and they were really interested in what I was interested in beauty. So when I went into the arts community. I joined an acting group, I joined a writing group, a theatre group. I loved it because we all spoke of the same things. And when I met these spiritual people, they were very passionate about spirituality. And I went with them to their strange activities, strange rituals. And in fact, one of the things I noted about them, they said Christians complain about waking up early on a Sunday and more than a 20-minute sermon. But when I went to where they went, they devoted a whole night to very intense practices that were a little scary and not worth repeating in a church, but they were very devoted and they were very passionate. And that drew me to some degree. But what I found at the bottom of the arts and at the bottom of the spiritual was an ugliness. They were obsessed with beauty, but there's always an ugliness underneath. And I found that people who were in these communities were very depressed. They were drawn to the darker side of life. They were very unhealthy. They didn't have that healthy family, that healthy foundation. They treated each other in unhealthy ways, and they had psychological problems that they weren't dealing with, and they were sinking deeper and deeper into this dark place in the human soul. This is what the arts can't overcome. And I say that the arts is a place where you go at night, you gather around a place and you drink from the cup and you speak of beauty and you feel like, yes, this is it, this is the place. But then in the morning, the sun comes in and it dispels the illusion and you find yourselves the sad, hungover humans with the food and the wine turning, and you're left back on the world and you say, this isn't enough, this won't do. So I was drawn into it, but at the end I knew that there was something missing here. There was an ugliness beneath, there was a lie beneath. So I left the arts and I thought maybe the academy, the university, the place of logic, reason and truth might be the place to find some sense of meaning in my life. Now, at the academy, there's a lot of atheists, and in one sense, I enjoyed the atheists as opposed to the spiritualists because they said, I'm willing to believe anything as long as you give me evidence. They had a clear foundation of what to stand on, and if there is a God, some of them would say, if there is a God, I am curious to know, but you have to show me from where I stand a rock-solid foundation up to that truth. And we had great talks, and we had great worldviews. Now, the most recent census in Australia says that there's a lot of unbelief in Australia, a lot of atheism. And while I say that there definitely is worldviews that don't have a supernatural or metaphysical dimension, there are a lot of beliefs at the university. I know that last week, David read about when Paul went to Athens, and he said, and it was full of idols, and they were very religious and pious, devoted people. And I think the university is much the same. You won't find people who are necessarily religious, but you will find people who are very pious to worldviews. They believe in this philosophy or that ideology. They say, who did you vote for last election? They're very politically motivated and activated and engaged. All these people have strong convictions in their worldviews. And I would talk to them about these worldviews, and I said, what is the truth? What is the story? That's another thing I found was, when I was young, I thought stories were for children, and when I grew up, I'd have to put away childish things. But no, adults live their lives in accordance to one narrative or another. And the narratives that go on at university are their worldviews. And I asked them, what is the story of the world? And it is the story of history, of politics and economics. It is the story of culture and of nature. And for all of them, they said the story is a story not of truth as such, but truth as power. If there is no higher truth, then there is always power. There is the truth of humans are animals. Humans are elaborate animals. They wouldn't agree with, say, the metaphors of animals in the Bible, that man must overcome the beast of sin or else be ruled by it, or the beasts of nations in Daniel. They wouldn't like that language, but they agree that man is born red in tooth and claw, and it's all about oppression and tyranny. It's about fighting. It's about one tribe dominating over another. The history of humanity is a history of oppression, of power, politics, and economics. It's a history that is harsh and brutal, and it left me feeling very despondent, very depressed. I couldn't deny the facts of the case. This is what history is. There is a lot of kingdoms and wars and poverty and brutality, but I hoped there was a truth beyond that, and I couldn't be comfortable with the stories that were being told at university, and I felt very disassociated. I fled from that place feeling so hollow. In fact, I got very depressed in my thinking. I kind of backed myself into a corner of, well, the beautiful things aren't true and the true things aren't very beautiful, and I couldn't reconcile these two things together. I started to fail my classes. I stopped enrolling in classes. I lost my sense of taste. I couldn't taste anything anymore, and I felt numb in my fingertips. Apparently, these are real, responses to when you are very depressed. I didn't know that at the time, but these responses are very, very serious. But I was just in an existential angst. And then my roommate, on a whim, just kind of said, "You're not doing anything. Let's go traveling. Let's go to the Philippines." So I went to the Philippines on a whim with my roommate, and I climbed waterfalls and I swam with whale sharks. It was a very nice time. But I had this existential problem at the center of me, and I didn't know what to do about it. So we were going through the Philippines, and we came to this town at the top of a mountain with a little Catholic church at the center that had been built by the Spanish missionaries many generations ago. And everyone there was happy. That's what I noticed about them. They were all weirdly happy. I didn't like smiles at this point in my life. If someone's smiling at you, it's a proof of either ignorance and naivete, or it's the fact that they are depressed, but they are trying to hide it, or it is the smile of a car salesman. That's what I thought most people's smiles were. When I went to church and people said, "Hi, come on in," I'd go, nah. I didn't like that smile. That's a car salesman smile. You want me in your pyramid scheme. That's what I thought it all was. But these people were smiling genuinely, and I could tell they weren't conning anyone, and I could tell they weren't ignorant of the tragedies of life, because they were very intimately involved with that, and they were smiling through it, not in spite of it or to bury it. And I couldn't wrap my head around it, because these people were like, "I wish I could go to university so I can get a job and I could support my family." And here I was fleeing university because I felt such existential pain, and I felt very privileged and very, very foolish in that moment. And I asked them, "How are you so happy?" And this one woman said, "King Jesus, that's how we're happy." And I'd never heard that term. I'm sure my father had said King Jesus. I'm sure my father had given me all the answers of life, but I just wasn't listening when I was younger. But King Jesus was different from the vague Jesus of my imaginings. King Jesus was someone, as opposed to that Jesus who is that vague prophet, that spiritual leader. I always thought Jesus Christ must be the son of Mr. and Mrs. Christ. What is the Christ? What is King Jesus? And these people were saying that Jesus is a very active power in the world. And that just started something in the back of my head. So I had been, for many, many years, it took me, I think, 8 years to go from adulthood back into the church. So not 40 years in the desert like it took some of the Israelites, but certainly a long time out in the desert, bouncing between the idols of the modern world and between the despairs of desolation. But then King Jesus was the first tick, the first something that made me think this is a worldview. Like all the worldviews I had heard from all the capitalists and Marxists and all the Kantians and Humeans, this is a worldview that has proponents, it has concepts and presuppositions, and I can understand this. So I began to read the Bible, and I read the Bible 4 times, cover to cover. And I've been told this is not normal for most people, and I know that not everyone is an avid reader, but I would strongly suggest to read the Bible from cover to cover, because that is a great story, and the Bible is a narrative that has momentum and flow. The Bible is full of surprises and full of interesting setup and payoff. I think my father has actually stolen this idea from me and used in one of his sermons, but I'll repeat it again. There's a great Russian playwright called Chekhov. He has a thing called Chekhov's gun, which is to say, if you mention a handgun, a gun or a gun on the wall in Act 1, Scene 1 of your play, before the play ends, the gun must go off. That is to say, don't add anything superfluous to your play, but also everything you add has to serve the story. And if you know anything of, say, crime dramas or detective novels, there's all this setup. There's all these little hints and clues. And the great thing about those stories is at the end, Sherlock Holmes or Poirot will come in and go, I've solved it, and he'll explain the whole thing, and everyone gets this great sense of catharsis from that's why that was, and that's why this is, and of course, it all makes sense now. And the Bible was full of things. The whole Old Testament, God is making promise after promise and covenants and setups and Chekhov guns. All these ideas were propping up, and then Jesus came and he fulfilled each and every one. And I was blown away by the beauty of this book. This is a beautiful piece of literature. Even if you're not religious, I couldn't find a way to explain how amazing this book is. Over hundreds of years and over many generations, this book was all flowing in the way that all the great narratives that I had read do, but this was doing it so much better. It was so amazing. And the more I read it, the more I started to see the truth behind it as I read the historical record and the archaeological record, and the way people talk seems so true. One of my greatest one of the things I love most in the Gospels is Jesus and Pontius Pilate. Because Pontius Pilate asked that question, veritas, quomo veritas, which is truth. What is truth? As Jesus said, I am here to proclaim the truth. And as I said back at the university, people say there is no truth but power. And it seems Pontius Pilate's very intimate with that. He's serving Rome. Rome is the power of the Mediterranean. Rome is the most powerful kid on the block. That's the truth Pontius Pilate knows, the truth of violence and the sword and the cross. And Jesus says, I have a truth that will supersede, that will overcome this. And it just was so powerful to me that as I read it each time, I saw more and more of this beautiful story. And the more I read it, the more true it seemed. And I always say, I read it for the fifth time, for the first time. I saw the beauty and the truth come together. I saw heaven and earth overlap. And I saw at the cross, as C.S. Lewis says, myth become fact and justice and mercy kiss. This was my path back into the promised land, was this beautiful story. I loved the story that brings it all together in the form of Jesus. This is my testimony of how I came to be an adult convert. I went out into the world and I found so many worldviews. Everyone's living in accordance to some story or another. To quote Shakespeare, all the world's the stage and we are merely players. We have our entrances and our exits. We have our scripts to read off, but who wrote your script? What is your purpose? What is your role? Everyone is living in accordance to some script. Most of us are living to the script we have in our own minds, our own hearts. What do I want out of life? But some people acknowledge that there's definitely some greater power, some greater force, and we have to live in accordance to it. And I say that the Bible is the greatest way to find the story, God's story, and God has a role for you to play, and God is the great story writer, and he invites us all into that story, which is just amazing to me. This story is still living today, and if you meet people in other places in the world where Christianity is coming in and the gospel is spreading, you find people who say, I am part of this kingdom, this great narrative, and Jesus is my king. And it answers all the longings of every story. Every story is a shadow of this great narrative. I love the Bible story, and I find my place in it. And that's my testimony, and I thank you for hearing me today, and I invite you all to think of concepts in the Bible, think of where you find your place in that narrative, and just how your story connects with the story of the world and the story of God. So I'll wrap up now with a prayer, and then I think we have a final hymn.